talk a little bit about the dominant rules and processes of publishing. And as I said, some lessons that I have learned about how to agitate these over the last 3 decades. It is not about building formulas, because that is one of the things that I want to underline in this conversation with you all, that every struggle, every journey creates its own needs and its own rules for what kind of agitation you want to bring forth. But hopefully, again, the more that we share, the more that collective agitation can build. And then if there is time, I don't know whether there might be lots of question and answers, so we can have a discussion. But if there's time, we can also workshop an example or two, perhaps on Google Docs. So that's what I have today. So in terms of thinking about an unorthodox processes of knowledge making for justice in a landscape that is wounded by caste violence, a guiding principle that has, or a few guiding principles that have been important for me are that in such a landscape that has been wounded and scarred by systemic caste violence for centuries, and where caste violence is actually so deeply ingrained and has even constituted epistemic violence, then in such a landscape, we cannot really talk about socio-political disempowerment as something that can be separated from intellectual disempowerment or epistemic violence. And also, if this is something that we agree on, that socio-political disempowerment is inseparable from intellectual disempowerment and epistemic violence, then the struggles for socio-political justice are inseparable from struggles for epistemic and poetic justice. And much can be said about these forms of justice, but in a very outline fashion, what I would say is that socio-political justice is a kind of justice for which we fight through legislation. It is something that we seek legislation for, whereas poetic justice is justice that always remains a yearning. It is something that can never, the justice that can never be achieved through legislation is justice that lives in the yearning for that justice lives as a poetic justice. That is where poetic justice lies, in that continuous yearning for justice. So so on the one hand, there are these guiding principles or thoughts that I just shared. On the other hand, what we are faced with is a landscape of broken trust. So if trust is central to making and receiving of knowledge, then broken trust is central to epistemic violence. And the broken trust that I'm talking about is like a system of knowledge making where those who have the power and who are who have been legitimated as experts of knowledge making, the dominant knowledges that they have produced versus the subjects of that knowledge, the landscape from that enables that knowledge, the communities that enable that knowledge, that is the fundamental distrust or fundamental broken trust that I'm talking about between these, on the one hand, those who produce knowledge, and on the other hand, those about whom knowledge is produced many times. So then the question is, how do we write and publish knowledge for justice in a landscape of broken trust? And I will keep saying that there are no formulas for this, because I think every journey with knowledge making, every intervention will probably bring its own important guiding questions, but I want to share three guiding questions that have been important to me for grappling with building trustworthy knowledges. So the first is what I have alluded to before. What does it take for scholarship to build long-term and trustworthy partnerships with struggles of the places and people who are often designated as the field and thereby relegated to spaces outside the university or outside dominant institutions of learning, and also thereby the dominant fields where expert knowledge is produced? A second question is that those who actually enable these experts to make knowledge, can the same people, can the same communities, can the same places also become the key critics, the key evaluators, and also co-authors of that knowledge? And I just want to say here that whenever I mention co-author or co-authorship, I don't mean just typing words on a page together. What I use the word co-author for, or co-authorship for, is a shared authority. Like, how do we share authority across these unequal divides? And the third is, what does it take to give theoretical and epistemological weight to those critical knowledges whose forms, genres, expressions, languages, scripts are consistently discredited in many research universities across the world? So, again, to say a few things about, so much can be said. We can talk about trust and trustworthiness. I do not at all want to suggest that this can be all captured in a slide, but some things that I want to highlight based on the journeys that I have been a part of. I would say that it's an ongoing, ever evolving struggle, where there's a lot of collective unlearning, a lot of collective relearning, and there's also a lot of shared creativity. There's lots of visions of transformation that are in conversation with one another, sometimes in tension with one another. There are lots of contradictions sometimes in these processes. But this is it is in these processes of shared creativity and visions of transformation that this labor of seeking trust and trustworthiness is found. And it is a very, very contextual, depending on the place, depending on the time, depending on the struggle, depending on the journeys that various members of the collective come from. All of that shapes this work. And so it's not at all a smooth journey. It is one with many precious lessons, many victories, as well as mistakes that happen along the way, mistakes and pains and agonies that often are also forgiven in the interests of continuing to labor for the shared dream. So before I talk about like the specific lessons in relation to publication and the kinds of negotiations, navigating. I mean, that is the bulk of what I want to talk about. But in order to ground those lessons, I want to just give you a little sense of what, these 3 decades or more of journeying with these questions, where am I coming from, just so that those specific lessons make sense. So I want to talk briefly about this book called Sangtin Yatra, Saath Zindagiyon Mein Lipta Nari Vimarsh. This is a book that came out of this desire to critique the double standards in the NGO sector, that the organizations that were that seek to empower, or that sought to empower women who were seen as coming from quote unquote backward classes, or impoverished backgrounds, or oppressed caste locations. The organizations who were seeking to do this work, how they themselves enacted the caste violence, class violence, and all the different kinds of violence that actually they said they were going, they are working against, how the organizational structures intentionally or unintentionally ended up serving those same systems. So this is a book that was written with 8 women of Sitapur district over a period of 2 years. I'm not going to be able to do justice at all to the various layers, but I just want to give you a sense of what this book was about, so that you know how this journey started unfolding. I also want to say before that, my research had been in East Africa, and even though there were many genres in which I was writing that work, I was doing that work in multiple languages also. So a little bit in Hindi and Urdu, and some came out in Kiswahili. There was poetry. There was and there were like storytelling, anecdotes, those kinds of things. But a lot of that research that I did come out primarily for an academic audience in the form of journal articles. So this work actually was not even intended initially as something that would become, it was seen more, it emerged more as an activist project, and there was not even a vision to publish it. It's just because how the work fed from one thing to another, that a whole unanticipated struggle took form around this work. And this is something that I also want to emphasize, that a lot of times in academic work, there's all this focus on, you are supposed to know the journey prior to starting a journey. We are supposed to already write a proposal. We are already supposed to like lay out what our arguments are going to be. Like these are the conditions in which we are asked to become expert knowledge makers. Those conditions and the way that the work on the ground unfolds, there can be sometimes deep and fundamental contradictions in that vision of knowledge making. So Sangtin Yatra, the book that I just mentioned, it was written over a period of 2 years. There was a controversy around this book. There was an attack on the book by the leadership of the organization because of certain things that were said in the book about the politics of NGOs and how the NGOs fed these double standards. And the fight around that attack led to a signature campaign to protect the authors. And in order for people to sign the petition, people wanted a translation. And so in 5 days and 5 nights, I translated the book from Hindi to English. And then one thing led to another, and the book came out. There was a South Asian edition of the book published by Zuban, and there was an international edition of the book published by the University of Minnesota Press. And both the publishers asked that there be an introduction and a postscript that could analyze the attack on the book and what was unfolding at that time around the tensions around this, our critique of NGOization. So Playing with Fire is both a translation of the book in Hindustani, and also there are the introduction and the postscript are there as an analysis of what happened in the aftermath of the book. I also want to say that in the Hindi edition of the book, we very deliberately, the language in which the book is written complicates the divide between Hindi and Urdu, which of course has only, I mean, even in the early 2000s, we could see what was happening with the way the divisions between the language were being politicized and communalized, and the situation is much graver now. But in that book at that time, we were already refusing that distinction between Hindi and Urdu, and also between Hindi and Awadhi, where Hindi is the imposed language, a particular kind of language that is taught in schools, whereas many members of the collective were thinking and expressing themselves in Awadhi, which is technically not the language that is taught in schools, that mostly remains a spoken language, which for the authors was the language of their heart, but is reduced in the official registers as a dialect in very violent ways. So the book was really about building collective methodologies of trust and vulnerability. The chapters explore an ethic of becoming a collective that can dream of justice. What are the processes? How do we, when we come from such a divided landscape, how do we begin the process of trusting and becoming co-travelers? Why do we take that risk? How do we take that risk? What does it mean to take that risk? And then, as I said previously, fighting double standards in not only activist work, but also in academic research, also in how documentaries are made about struggles, and who tells the story, and who is the subject of that story, and what are the processes by which, is there any co-authorship? Is there even a shared authority, or is it all still in the modes where certain kinds of dominant representations are seeking to make experts, and some people become experts, the others become the subjects and objects of that expert knowledge. So this question of ethical telling and ethical representing was undergirding everything that we were taking on. And also this fundamental contradiction that happens all the time, where Savarna, Brahmin, elite activists and researchers are asking othering an other to become vulnerable without ever becoming vulnerable ourselves. And so that was a question that was really at the crux of all of this, that was guiding the work of the collective. So just again, giving you a little bit of a glimpse of how this work, like what this work was doing. So I'll just touch on a couple of chapters. So the beginnings of a collective journey. So the work actually began with the centering on the ethic and the process. Can we figure out what this journey is going to be like? What is this journey going to be about? And how, in a landscape ridden with systemic inequalities, where we are finding it very difficult to trust one another, why and how do we build that trust? I always want to talk about this very short childhood. It's a very short chapter, actually. It's about 10 pages long in the book, and yet it is one of the most poignant ways in which the work that we were able to do happened, because we began by sharing childhoods, and perhaps it was the fact that in childhoods, when we are little, we are absorbing, we are learning about the violence that is happening around us, and we ourselves we don't have the power so much to perpetrate that violence, to become violent beings in that system yet. And it was something about that innocence of childhoods, where people could let go, where people could share and cry and connect with those memories and with each other's memories, that laid the foundation for the journey to come. And I feel like if the trust and the connection had not happened while writing about childhoods, while even remembering for so many women that the childhood memories were so hard to remember, or that there were no joys. Like they really had to, like, did we have fun? And did we enjoy the childhood? Did we even play anything as children? It was these kinds of questions and the tears that they brought, that allowed for a deep, a deep connection. And so then, because the collective of 9 women who were all writing, we were all writing diaries, and we were talking and processing this work, because we did that work of becoming vulnerable, together, that we were able to do the work that came after remembering childhoods, which is how we all became adolescents, how we, women coming of age, and the attachments, the loves, the dreams, and the failing of dreams. Then the diary writers, all of us in different ways, but this was all primarily centered on women, the 7 rural women from different villages of Sitapur who were part of the NGO. When they started talking about their marriages and how the dreams that they had seen did not get realized once they became married, the kinds of challenges that happened, as well as the beautiful joys and connections, moments, that those short-lived moments that they wanted to write about. But then the 5th chapter of the book talks about, or the 4th chapter talks about, how the impoverished conditions in their homes led them to seek jobs in the NGO sector, and how in this NGO, this particular NGO that talked about bringing empowerment in the homes and communities for women, how the same jobs were actually they were only accessible through privileged caste networks. So even when women who worked in this NGO came from poor backgrounds, it was the upper caste women from poor backgrounds who first came to find out about the jobs. So it's the Savarna and very, and Sitapur, there's a lot of RSS presence in Sitapur, and there's a lot of dominance of Brahmins, and so the organization and the NGO sector also came to be dominated by Brahmin workers working as mobilizers. So those things all come out in the conversations, and then the 6th chapter, which became the big object of attack, basically talks about challenges of NGOization and dreams of Sangtin, that after showing how all of these systems of oppression continue to dominate the landscape of rural Sitapur, settling on these questions of grappling with double standards and lies of NGOs that talk about justice and equality, but that fail to do the same work within the organizations. And so, can there be a dream that can challenge this reality? And can the dream give everybody the courage for the journeys to come? So that was the impulse of writing behind writing the 6th chapter, which became the inconvenient chapter and led to this a very violent attack by the leadership on the authors. And so now moving on from that to just sort of talking about the intricacies or the lessons learned from this journey. So we self-published this book. This book did not go to any big publisher because of the way that the journey came together. Some decisions were made, and self-publication of the book was one of them. And with self-publication comes also the responsibility of distributing the work, which is a very, very complicated affair. None of us had ever published anything before. Distribution was even more. It's like, what? That after publishing a book, you also have to distribute the book. But we learned every bit of that. And I mean, as the the academic who shuttled between places, who had more connections. I did have to take a lot of the responsibility for how this work will unfold once we decided to self-publish it and to distribute it. And I can talk about things that people might be interested in Q&A, but just to keep us going, I want to just briefly say what came after the book. So one was the attack from the NGO leadership, and the attack actually led to a resolve by the people of Sitapur, both women and men, because of the way the book was produced, because of the way the book became part of community's struggle in the process that we were writing it, that the attack actually led to a resolve by both women and men that we will actually bring the dream that the book saw into reality, and we will work for that. And so as a result, so this is 2005 now, we are 20 years later, and there have been continuous lessons in forging and sustaining ethical solidarities in an ever-expanding organization, one in which about 99% identify as Dalit, and about more than 50% of that membership is women in leadership positions. And also there's no one vision of what a leader is. There are different people in leadership at different times, depending on what it is that the organization is focusing on, because the organization has not really has agitated against this idea that there can be something called violence against women, or violence in one form, that like the communal violence, caste-based violence, violence against women, access to water, access to irrigation, access to dignity, access to National Rural Employment Guarantee Act benefits, the unemployment benefits, all of these things, like that we are not going to make a separation between everything that is related to life is the movement's matter. And so in this kind of ever-evolving, ever-expanding understanding of what a movement is, what solidarities are, there are continuous rich lessons that are unfolding. And so the Sangatan becomes a Pathshala, it becomes a university. The rallies, the campaigns, the theater, the everyday storytelling, the newspapers, the books that we have written in Hindi and Hindustani, all of these things unfold as part of the journey. And in English, for me, what has been important is like, what selected lessons, rather than offering the Sangatan and Sangatan's people or our various campaigns are not for consumption. So if that is not for consumption, are there specific lessons that can be taken from this kind of learning to agitate the status quo conventions about what makes knowledge valuable, or how knowledge can be made trustworthy, given the landscape of broken trust that I talked about earlier. So these are some things that came after Sangtin Yatra. And in the realm of continuous, what that continuous knowledge making looked like, there were, as Bharat very generously shared, there have been multiple translations of the work, in not just Sangatin's work, but also the other things that I have written. So there's been ongoing translations of the work, and with every translation, there are ongoing dialogues with movements about these knowledge-making practices. And with those ongoing dialogues come pedagogies of connection, pedagogies of hope. People in many, it's not just the university and college students speaking in English who are reading this work. The conversations are happening sometimes in villages that are seen as remote by the metropolitan imagination, or conversations happening in certain neighborhoods of Brazil, or at times in Palestine. The book was also translated into Turkish. And so many organizations and collectives of Kurdish women have read the book and discussed the book. So just these unanticipated ways in which pedagogies of connection and hope unfold. And so as this work kept happening, what became more and more important was that again, like, not to serve the stories of the bodies that are striving and laboring in the movement, but what can we learn from the process? How can unlearning and relearning about this work and these knowledge making processes, it's not something that can only happen in the head. It happens in the heart, it happens in the body. And so can we embody what would that process, if we don't want to see bodies of Dalit Sathis as these bodies that can be objectified? How can we learn from these Dalit Sathis as theorists of struggle, as makers of very, very important knowledge-making processes? And so for that, it became important that, for me at least, the community theater piece and bringing the community theater around these issues in urban centers. So like Lucknow, we did some theater building in Delhi, but then a lot of the work later on happened in the Yari Road area of Bombay, in Andheri. And so then once this work through theater started happening, then I'm like, I want to do the same thing in my classrooms. The classrooms, people can't just sit and consume these bodies from South Asia in their while sitting in their seats. Like, can we turn the classroom into a theater so that people can better appreciate, again, the work of these Sathis who are working from very marginalized locations? But how do the Sathis become theorists and knowledge makers, as making profound interventions in the dominant landscape of knowledge production? How can the students in the United States appreciate the work of the Sathis in that form? And so then again, these stories were not for consumption, but even the work that we were doing in the classroom, how could those collective processes agitate dominant practices of the academy? And so all this also meant that publishing, the work of publishing has to make space for these arguments and also embody them in form. It can't be just like, making these arguments just again in that headspace, but how if we are making arguments about moving away from certain kinds of dominant practices, then what form can those arguments take? There's much to be said about all of these things, as I said, but let me just move from, I'll skip this. I want to, talk a little bit about practices. So there are several successful, quote unquote, successful practices based on lessons learned. And I will remind you again that this is just because what I am sharing here is what has worked in this particular journey that I have shared with you. So a lot of times, if you look at the requirements of a book proposal by a press, they will say, do not send your whole manuscript to the acquisition editor. And I will tell you something very different, that actually all of this work, like the work with the Sathis in Hindi, the work, that has been about making academic arguments, academic agitations, all these 9 books that have come out from not only this work, but other work as well that has tried to agitate dominant modes of knowledge making. Not once did did a book proposal come before the book? So completing the book on the terms of the project, the term of the struggle, is has been very important before drafting any kind of proposal. The other thing I would say is that the focus of a series, like there are all these multiple series published by different publishers. So what is the content of those book series, or how is the book series imagining itself as doing something different in the landscape of knowledge making? That, and or support from an editor who understands the vision, those things have mattered more than the prestige of a given press. Because, I mean, these days, presses can pretty much find how to, they can learn from each other. They can learn from, if, say, a University of Illinois Press publishes a book, then they can find out how University of Minnesota Press advertised or found market for another book. So there are all these ways in which accessing the audience can be learned by the presses from one another, but what you can't get is what is irreplaceable is the support of an editor who can share your vision or to whom you can explain your vision. Also, again, like even though this is not something that the rules say, but informal conversations with those editors before submitting the manuscript are very, very critical. So, when those manuscripts are seen by the editors, by series editors, or the acquisition editor of a press, you get a chance to gauge the level of excitement, whether these people will be committed to the work, because again, publishing is just part of the journey. It's like it is the life after something comes out, and you want to have the support from the publisher to make that work happen. That post publication of a book, how are they going to be committed to advancing that work? So yeah, future support, what kind of future support can you anticipate from this person, or the team who you're going to be working with? So that's a few here. I've got more. I think when a book structure is defying the conventional format, whether it is because you are not doing traditional collaborations, like for me, many collaborations are people who have never gone to school. They are not people with certified degrees. And sometimes they're also people with, they're very established people. But in non-traditional collaborations, and when you are blending languages, when you are blending scripts, when you are twisting the forms, genres, when you are writing for multiple audiences in the same text, for example, as part of the work that you want to do, then the book proposal has to be approached very creatively. And one of the places where that creativity becomes essential is about, these questions that are asked about the market. So if the market has never attended to the questions that matter to you, or that matter to the struggles that you are committed to advancing, then how do you take on the question about the market on your own terms? Many people in this room, I know, have probably come across this whole question of multiple markets, because when you're writing in the, say, a press, so press is based in the United States or in Canada or in UK, Europe, often they are interested in publishing for what is called the international market. But when something is published for an international market, the prices of those books are so high, and also they don't really care about reaching markets in the global South, and especially South Asian market. And so do we want to write books so again, how many of us would be happy to produce work that is grounded in the soil, there, but not accessible to the people there. So then, yeah, then signing those contracts where you say international market except South Asia. And then conversely, if you have a South Asian market, then the question is then how do people outside of South Asia, what access would they have to the work? And this is where online open access work becomes really important. So those are some other things to consider. And the third thing I just like was making a list about how much careful negotiation and navigation is needed at the level of the contracts and publication processes. Because when a book is reviewed, the reviewers, we don't always have a say on, we give a list of possible reviewers to presses, but we don't really know who ended up reviewing them. And reviews may need to be negotiated with the editors. And similarly, the copy editing process. When I first, when Playing with Fire was being reviewed by the University of Minnesota Press, and the copy editor gave me 200 pages of things that she wanted fixed. And almost 100% of those things that needed to be fixed, according to the copy editor, were all the sections from the diary writers. It was the women who were offering their lives and who were theorizing them in these very, very deep ways in a spoken language. It was their spoken language translations that the copy editor had trouble with. And when I said that I don't have the right to fix these without consulting with the authors, and that I needed extra time to negotiate with across these continents and oceans and 7-8 villages that women were living in, all different villages inside Sitapur district. They were not even willing to give me the time to do that work because anyway, so yeah, everything then becomes a fight, everything becomes a struggle, and in the process you end up becoming the teachers of these dominant presses, that like, look, if you have signed up to support this work, it basically means that you have to learn what it means to support this work, support the people whose lives and sweat this work is coming out of. So copy editing process, I would say, is also very, very important in this kind of negotiation and navigation. Then for blending genres and languages and scripts, even the number of fonts, like in the latest book, Hungry Translations, there are there's poems and plays, and there's diaries, there is theoretical sections, there are visuals. So like often they don't allow you more than 1 or 2 fonts. And so like making explicitly specifying that if this is the kind of work that you're doing, and if this is the particular way in which you want that work represented, even the number of fonts is something that you have to negotiate in advance with the publishers. I want to give an
sorry, we have to conclude in 2-3 minutes, so we can give more time for question answer. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, we are going to be able to do that in a couple of minutes. Thank you, Bharat. So copyrights and royalty agreements similarly have to be navigated and negotiated, because again, when we are working with people who may not be holding academic degrees, if they're showing up as authors, as co-authors, then all of this stuff about copyrights and royalties has to be taught to the people we are publishing with. So let me just, so there is we can stop here, but I'm sure you all have seen let me see, like I wanted to just give an example. So just a quick, just so that we can chat about this in a more focused way. This is just submission guidelines from Roman and Littlefield. And as I said before, it says, please do not send your entire manuscript unless requested by the acquisitions editor. But, they ask for various pieces that you can read here, description of the book, what makes it important, timely or unique, analysis of competing or similar books, including publishers and dates of publication, a description of your target audience, general readers, etc., undergraduate, graduate students, scholars, professionals. So again, they're not really talking about taking the work to necessarily the places that we might be concerned that where the knowledge is emerging from. So yeah, you can take a look at other pieces here, but just wanted to bring it to that screen before we start chatting about your questions. And if we have time, we can play with an example or two. Thank you.
Thank you, Richa, for your presentation. And now we are opening this session for Q&A. But before Q&A, I just want to make a small request that please keep your questions and comment very brief and succinct. And the second thing is that I have posted the feedback form link. Please take the feedback form link because that is very important for us to improve our programs. And also, if you want to join Bahujan Scholar in any capacity, we would love to make connections. So now you can raise your hand or you can post your question in the chat box and we will read. Okay, Naveen, go ahead.
मैं हिंदी में ही बोलूंगा।
Yeah,
सबसे
Hindi
पहले तो
में,
मुझे
but
सुन के
to the point.
ओके आई ट्राई।
I mean,
हाँ, सुन के मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा और आपने बहुत अच्छा पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ एनजीओ, तो मेरे 18 साल का अनुभव भी यही कहता है, तो मैं उस पर लिखूंगा बाद में। लेकिन मैंने जो पीएचडी सबमिट की और वो उत्तर प्रदेश में ही है, और खासकर वो समुदायों के जो बीमारी में सबसे ज्यादा हुए और डॉक्टर सबसे ज्यादा कम बने। आई थिंक ये दोनों तरह की चीजें। मैं इस पर अपना एक पीएचडी मेरी 5 साल हो गई, अब मैं उस पर अपना एक बुक लिखने के मूड में हूँ, तो मैंने जो देखा समझा वो लिखा भी। अगर मुझे अब मैं थोड़ा बहुत मैंने कुछ समझा भी है, अगर मुझे ईमेल आईडी मिल जाए। दूसरा, ये जो किताब जो कि आपने जुबान और ये प्लेइंग विद द फायर, सो वेयर इज द पब्लिकेशन, कैन आई गेट इट इंडिया और समवेयर एल्स? बिकॉज़ आई वांट टू रीड दैट बुक। एंड पहला तो प्रश्न ये है कि मैं इसको पढ़ना चाहता हूँ। दूसरा मेरा प्रश्न है कि मैं अपने पीएचडी जो लिखना चाहता हूँ उसके लिए क्या मुझे और भी जरूरत पड़ेगी? जो मैंने कुछ समझा है उसको मैं लिखूंगा, नोट भी मैंने कर लिए हैं, तो मैं आपके साथ कांटेक्ट करूंगा। थैंक्स अ लॉट वन सेकंड। थैंक्स अ लॉट वन सेकंड।
Richa, would you like to take?
या थैंक यू नवीन। हाँ, मैं आपके साथ ईमेल आईडी साझा कर सकती हूँ बहुत खुशी के साथ। और आपको ये किताब कहाँ से मिल सकती है, ये भी ये सारी चीज़ें हम लोग बातचीत जारी रख सकते हैं। और आपके अभी के काम के लिए किस तरह से बातचीत को आगे बढ़ा सकते हैं, इन सब चीज़ों के लिए, हाँ, वेरी हैप्पी टू कंटिन्यू द कॉन्वर्सेशन।
Okay, Kavya and then Abdul.
Thank you so much, Risha, for that presentation. Yeah, it's really nice on how you're talking about like what knowledge is to publish and like why we should publish. So I have a question. I don't remember the exact word you have used in the first slide, but you were talking about how socio-economic disadvantages lead to intellectual I'm not sure if disadvantage is the right word. I just totally forgot what's in the slide. But basically, intellectual disadvantage and epistemic violence. Can you just talk more about the intellectual disadvantage and the difference between this and epistemic violence. And if you can also correct that particular word, I don't remember what exactly that is.
I thank you, Kavya, for listening so deeply. What I was talking about was like, since I was speaking specifically about the politics of NGOization, where there's so much conversation about empowerment and how people have been disempowered socio-politically, and yet there is just this blindness toward how socio-political disempowerment cannot, like, so the systems that create socio-political disempowerment are also intellectually disempowering for the same communities, and yet there's a reluctance to engage or to connect intellectual disempowerment centrally in the conversations by the dominant systems and conversations.
Yeah, I totally got the gist of it, but I'm curious to know, so you have used intellectual disempowerment and epistemic violence because you have a linguistic background. So I wanted to know, like, why you have put those two words next to each other.
I see. Because epistemic violence, especially in the, in the Anglophone academia, we have been talking a lot about epistemic violence for a while, right? That the epistemes themselves are engaged very saliently in producing a particular kind of violence. And so I wanted to connect that with because the NGO, there's a whole sector that talks about empowerment and disempowerment, but they're not really they're not so invested in epistemic violence. And so I just feel that it has been very important for this work, for me at least, to bring these conversations together, so that they're not again like happening in these compartmentalized sectors, so to speak.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Abdul and then Vinod. Abdul, please.
Thank you so much, Richa. It's always been wonderful to think with you, and I know you for a long time. So amazing. Thank you for sharing this long journey with us. There are two questions, and they are kind of parallel. I was thinking, there's this epistemic violence that happens between this binary between the field and the knowledge production centers. And I was wondering, like, where do we locate our struggles? Like, for you, the struggle is in the field. I think that our struggle as academic is actually in the academy, because that's where most ammunition that is used as epistemic violence is produced, and then it goes out. And one professor who goes out and does that kind of work that you do, 1,000 do the other kind of work. And so I think, like, how we can kind of relocate our struggle instead of perpetuating this binary between the field and the academy, kind of like actually thinking the academy itself need to be sort of turned upside down. There's Zora is around, so I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Zora, can you give me a second? I'm talking. It's just exactly the moment she had to come in. Okay, wait, just 1 second. The other question I'm quickly going to say, and then probably the other question is, like, we are as academic, like, put in the worst, given the worst job to perform. That on the one hand, we are given the job of questioning the market, questioning the dominant trend, and at the same time, I mean, the struggle, that the pain in this presentation was challenging the market, but also succeeding in the market. It's like, I don't know how to do it. Like, at the same time, challenge it, but also succeed in that. So how to, like, reframe our struggles that challenge that binary between the field and the academy, and also, that does not and because the market then sort of commodifies the resistant itself. I was just looking at the book. Your book is like sold for $30 in Pakistan. That would be like 15,000 rupees, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I was just wondering if you could say something about that. But I mean, that's again like a process of thinking with you, and I know that we are on the same team. But those are the contradictions that we are in, and I was wondering, how do you kind of resolve those contradictions for yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much, Ejaz. Bharat, do you want me to take more questions and then respond, or just go one by one?
I mean, whatever you feel comfortable. If you want to, whatever, if you want to take this one or allow Vinod, let's see.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll-
time is short, so maybe allow more questions, I would say. Sorry, this
Okay.
is Sangeeta. Yeah.
Yeah, Sangeet, that's fine. Okay. So Vinod, please quickly your question or comment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bharat. I hope I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay. With quick round of, let me say, thanks and sadhuvad in terms of Hindustani to both Richa and Bharat, to bringing me out actually out of that mechanical framework in terms of not what I have achieved in reading, but in terms of what I was planning to publish now. So sadhuvad again for that. It was really very organic, and what I say to connect put the things in terms of a public intellectual framework, and what has been already discussed by the previous participant, that how to bargain with the, or rather teach them the market. So I was just asking because my framework was same, as I have also my field work located in central UP in the vicinity of Sitapur, that is Hardoi district, where after my field work I also had many sleepless nights in terms of the subjects or my co-subjects, or I because felt myself as subject at the time of going through my fieldwork. Is it possible? How is it possible to bring every time in terms of let's say non-academic work? Sometimes they belong to bring in the co-authors into the center, which I would like to do. But how is it possible? Because my top or issue was concerned with human rights violations of that. It's that in central UP. So I would like your reflection on that, if it is possible and how it can be.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, these questions really work very well together. Ajaz's and Vinod, yours. Thank you so much. So I will say about the first question about the field. Ajaz, one of the things that has been very important for this work, given that I mean, before Sangtin Yatra, before the Sangtin Yatra became a movement or became an organization, I never imagined, I didn't know even ABC of anything related to agricultural struggles, and yet working with farmers, working with, the movement came to be a movement primarily of farmers and laborers who were working on farms. So this idea of field for me has been, so three kinds of fields: the fields that feed us, the field where crops are grown that go in our belly, the field of, like say genders, the very specific fields that that we are supposed to be talking to, as well as then this larger the larger field of academia. I mean, so this complicating this idea of where the field is has been part of that. Field is everywhere, and turning the sites where epistemic violence is happening into, that is what I was saying, that instead of offering stories from that field over there, what has been at the center of the work is to actually show the violence of this field and interrupt very selectively through the knowledge making processes, interrupting the violence in this field, i.e. the academy. So turning the gaze on the academy as the center where epistemic violence is being produced, and using the insights from the journeys in other fields to do that work. I think that is what I have, I've been committed to doing. So in that sense, I'm agreeing with you that complicating this idea of, this static idea of field and field work, like just whatever that means for all of us, exploding the meaning of field in all the ways, wherever the field is for us, and what are the multiple fields that we want to bring into tension and agitation as we bend these forms and rules, and I think that is the challenge of the market. That I think also. I would say that one of the things that is energizing and liberating and that gives courage is when we don't allow ourselves, our imagination, to be limited by this one market that we are asked to specify in the book proposal. And the journey is never, it's not like it's not straightforward. I'll just give you an example that Hungry Translations did not. I had actually I had hoped that it would come out from a South Asian press before it would come out from the US, and I could not find anybody in South Asian presses were even more attached to disciplinary imagination than so they were like, ye kya hai? What is this? There's it's making no sense. And I didn't even get a proper review. It did not even go to the suggested reviewers. And later on, when it came out in the US, and I did not give the South Asian rights to the press that published, because I knew that it will be this exorbitant price that nobody would be able to buy it over there. So 4 years later, it came out as a different title because they didn't like Hungry Translations. They didn't think that would work for their market, so it came out in a different title. But what keeps the whole thing energized for me is being able to write in multiple languages for multiple audiences, and letting the energies and the reception by audiences in South Asia, and maybe I'll connect it with Vinod's question, that non-academic co-authors, for what has worked in our journey is not, again, this idea of this blind formula that, everything should be co-authored. Many times, the people that we work with, those people in Hardoi, why would they want to be invested in making an academic argument? There's some things that make sense for everybody to co-author, and that co-authorship requires its own rules. How is every word going to be worded? What are going to be the rules so that we don't participate in violent exclusionary practices in the ways that things are put together. But then there are also many times that when we are doing this work through shared collective journeys, then there are many different kinds of knowledges. They don't just the rallies, the campaigns, the songs of the rallies, the newspapers, newsletters. There are so many different ways in which that knowledge should ideally be feeding into everything that is being co-authored, and that nobody has a copyright. Everything belongs to the collective process, and everybody is also a representative of that knowledge. One of the things that my sathis have taught me, वो मुझसे कहती हैं कि आप हमेशा इसलिए क्यों परेशान होती रहती हो कि तुम एकेडमिक हो. We are also representing, we are also like this question of, we are also representatives and theorists. We do it in our campaigns. We are doing it you are not always present. So this thing, I'm not that we should not agonize about the power that we have as writers and representatives, but I also think that when we diminish the power, हम जब जो हमारे साथी जिस तरह से रिप्रेजेंट करते हैं स्ट्रगल को, जब हम उनकी मेहनत को कम आंकते हैं, या हम उनके रिप्रेजेंटेशन को हम हमेशा we reduce that, we think that only what we publish as academic texts is more important. So there's so many pieces here to learn, and then those lessons agitating us in the academy so that we can do better by coming back to what Ajaz is saying, like, sort of the violence that we unintentionally many times are actually perpetuating through our assumptions, because we are like so formed by these dominant violent assumptions. So I hope it kind of addresses some of your concerns in, at least a beginning of an answer to some of the questions that you raised, both of you, Ajaz and Vinod.
बहुत सारी मोहब्बत
Thank
आपका,
you very much.
बहुत शुक्रिया. That clarified a million things.
Thank you.
If you have any comment or question, still we have some time, so we would cover it. But
There might be a few questions in the chat. Do you want to read those?
is there a question? No, nothing.
One sec, okay, there's time. I'm sorry, I've got a cold and a cough, and so, but I just wanted to, Richa, your work is just so inspiring. And you've carved out a whole new pathway, I feel, for scholars, researchers, people doing any kind of, organizing work as well. To say how this, the writing part and how that writing can be this collective, collaborative process. And I can only imagine how difficult, the sort of more than 2 decades of journey has been. So I was wondering that, and also your work has been picked up in so many, different places and contexts across the world. I was wondering if there are examples of also where people have taken this as a model and done similar work in other places.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first, thank you so much, Sangeeta, for having been there. This work has seen some really horrifying times, and there were times when, I mean, I specifically remember the time when the attack by Mahila Samakhya director happened in 2004, and you were there.
Yeah.
So I think also,
Yeah.
I think this is also a reminder of like how many communities of struggle come to support each other, even though they look separated and disconnected, but they're actually, which connects back to the work being picked up. I mean, it's what is interesting again, that it's not necessarily in the form of the usual citational politics that we see, which it shouldn't be, right? It shouldn't be about but yeah, like so much work in, I mean, it was when Playing with Fire was translated into Turkish, there were like 50 different cities and towns where they read the book, the Turkish translation, and brought it into conversation with their struggles, and then it fed into their reflections. There was, and in South Africa, also similar processes where people read the work and read the processes about the processes around the work, and that has sparked conversations. And there are so many other places too, where actually in 2023, or December of 2022, when I visited Sri Lanka, there were some spontaneous translations of Playing with Fire into Tamil, and then they were connecting it with some of their struggles with NGO processes. So, I mean, I think it's like when something like that resonates, it kind of builds its own journeys, and it's impossible to track those journeys, but we know that the ways in which the resonances themselves then build new cultures of resistance, new cultures of epistemic possibilities that break away from the dominant modes. So yeah, I just wanted to share some of those instances where the work has moved forward in unanticipated ways. Thank you, Sangeeta.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you, Sangeeta. And there are some encouraging words from Sir Sarveswar. Thank you, Sarveswar. And I posted a Bahujan Scholar at Gmail email ID. So feel free to reach out and to connect with us. And now we are reaching towards the end of this session. So if you have a final comment or question, please. Otherwise, we will conclude in 2-3 minutes.
Yeah, again, I would love to hear more from members who are listening, or the folks who are in the room. If there
Yeah,
are
even if
specific
it's,
struggle,
yeah, I just
specific
wanted to
struggles you're
add,
working through.
sorry, I just wanted to add to what Richa is saying, that maybe people here on the call can also just share what they're working on, or
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be a question or a comment specifically about for Richa. And what are you struggling with?
Vishal.
Hi, Richa. Thanks again. It felt like I'm at ICDC lecture and listening to your class. So that experience got rehydrated. Yeah. So, which I think what we have read your book collectively in reading groups and also in classes at Minnesota, University of Minnesota, and how I feel probably the importance of your work, and now what I'm struggling right now, like having done my field work and writing my dissertation chapters, is that I think you have collectively written, it's the work, something Yatra and all is it's a joint collective work. But many times when we write dissertation, it's a sole authorship, right? And at times these are some of the ethical questions that you have. And the more I'm talking to my interlocutors, different than earlier work as a practitioner, but so how do you kind of share that credit with them? Because many times I feel these are the real theoreticians, as you were saying in your presentation, and taking that credit and writing on behalf of as if I'm theorizing it, I'm quoting them, but I somehow that credit goes to me. The focus is on me, and so that what you have done in your work is you have shared it with other collectives members. So how do you kind of deal with this tension? Which now I'm able to appreciate, although I've read your book before. But so if you can throw some light on that, if somebody else has to share regarding that.
This is a really important and ever-present issue, and I'll touch on two things, and we can, perhaps one of the things Bharat was talking about is perhaps that we can continue this conversation, because there's just so many layers to these conversations that we need to continue grappling with it. It's not but two things I want to, one is I will say that this idea, we kind of take for granted that we have to be sole authors in academia, or that, I mean, I think these are fights worth having with the committees now, because there is more than a tradition. There's more than a critical mass. There are people who have explored, this idea that all knowledge is co-authored, and that, collaborative processes, and I'm not saying that that's true of all kinds of research, but for many kinds of work that involve a certain kind of field work, or where actually it is the insights from the people that are allowing us to make certain interventions. So I think it is time to demand a different kind of space for co-authorship in our dissertations, and I think some people have been doing that work already. So maybe digging deeper into that, how and building that as a collective agitation. How do we work, how do we do that work in academia, where we are saying, this demand for a sole author dissertation is itself out of place in this particular kind of work that I'm doing, so making that argument, finding the support for that argument from the community that is doing that work, that's one thing. And then I think other very violent practice in the academy is this expectation of a particular kind of citation, right? And then citation has its own market and then it has its own value. But how do you tell the stories that you have learned in a way that the storytelling itself is producing an alternative politics and practice of citation? So when we tell the story, when we like take a concept or when we talk about an intervention, how do the people who have formed that intervention emerge as the theorists of that intervention, in the way that, so Vishal, you might be telling the story or I might be telling the story, but the way in which our sathis appear in that storytelling, the way in which the event itself is narrated, the insights itself, like reaching those insights, the process of developing those insights is narrated, how that can actually, it is the sathis who show up as the theorists of that insight, rather than, say, another public. I mean, like, published writers, published scholars can coexist side by side with these other sathis. It's not saying, like, displace these people, and it's when we are talking about all the vibrant ways in which knowledge is being made, how do we make that happen on the page? And this is, for me, the work of creativity, and that is why the artistic piece of it, the imagine, the activist, the artist, and the academic pieces, they are so tightly integrated in this work. So I hope, Vishal, that touches something. Thank you for that question.
Okay, there is a last comment because we have to conclude. There is a long. Okay, I'm currently working. This is from Preeti. I'm currently working on my PhD thesis. My final submission is in June. I'm working on well-being of women sex workers in Kolkata. I'm struggling with the care listed publication. I have approached few of them, but I got rejected by not giving any answer. In India, even if we have degrees and no publication, colleges and universities do not consider such candidates suitable for the job posting. Also, I'm rewriting my methodology chapter, which is totally changed after I reach at the conclusion.
Preeti, do you want to? This is really, there's so many layers. Do you want to say a few words about how you would like me to engage with these pieces of your journey? Is Preeti here?
I just
Yeah,
wanted to share what I am going through the phase of my PhD. So I thought of sharing. The thing is, actually, I wrote my whole chapter of methodology, the field, the ethnographic work, which the experiences, the small conversations which I had in the field, and I don't know how to put it together as a chapter, and where to put and how to connect it with the theories, because when you talk about feminist theories and approaches, um, sometimes I feel like there is no proper theory as a
Yes.
in women's studies where you can engage with this small experiences which you get it in the field.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I don't know when I
Yeah.
am engaging with
Um,
philosophical theory.
Yes, Preeti, you have touched on something really important here, because I think this idea that, like this demand that there should be an already available theory that can actually explain the stories and experiences that you are offering. I mean, where is the space for the gap? And I think this is what, and the fact that so much of the knowledge that we pretend that we know it all, but there's all we know is fragments. And sometimes, if we only know fragments, and if all of our knowledge is sort of, partial, we talk about that. The feminist theory talks about partial knowledges all the time. But does any theory that talks about partial knowledge also, like, how do we live partial knowledges on the page? How do we show our limitations, our own gaps, our own limitations on the page, without then again turning that into a smooth argument. So the breaks, the places where our own argument fails, the ways where the places in which we fail, like we as knowledge makers, it's like how do you normalize that failure, and how do you normalize those gaps? That this is part of what we are struggling with. And I think this is where taking that kind of creative artistic license, where finding your community, that these are like, yes, maybe my my advisor, my supervisor is not going to support this, but I am going to find those people in the academy who are doing that work, so that I have my, I've got my force with me. I can say that, yes, this work is happening in the academy, because I think that, going back to what Ajaz was saying, like, if the site is over here, if the violence is being produced in the academy, then challenging the spaces of the academy to enable that work. So you are making then the intervention in that space to ask for to demand the space for a different kind of fragmented knowledge that marks its own gaps.
Okay. I'm sorry, now we have to conclude this session because we are slightly over the time. So I would like to thank you, Richa. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation and great ideas and enriching discussion. And all the participants, thank you so much. I already posted again the feedback form link. Please take the feedback form, and also you can connect with us. So again, thank you so much, everyone, and see you again in next session. Yeah, bye.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for having me, Bharat. And thank you for your wonderful engagements, everyone.
Thank you. Bye all.
Bye, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.